Hi again, I'm Jack Lessenberry, and welcome back to Politics and Prejudices, the podcast. This is sort of an evolution of the column I wrote, the radio commentaries I did for many years. I hope you enjoy and keep listening. You can also catch up with both my writing and essays and podcasts you might have missed on my website and blog, lessenberryinc.com. That's ink as an ink pen, so please settle in, listen, and stay tuned afterwards for my closing essay. Today, we're lucky enough to have Michigan Chief Justice Bridget McCormack with us. She's been on the court for a little more than 7 years and is running for re-election this November. Prior to that, she began her career as a public defender in New York, taught law at Yale, and was the dean of the University of Michigan Law School, where she founded the Michigan Innocence Clinic. Justice McCormack, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, people have, or I think they have, a sort of general idea of what politicians do. I find there's only a very hazy understanding of what a state Supreme Court justice does. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about, we all know that from time to time you wear black robes and you hand down decisions, but that's not all there is to the job.
Yeah, it is interesting that we're this co-equal branch of government that is often the last word on disputes between the other branches, and also affects so many people's lives in our courtrooms throughout the state. And lots of folks have no idea who's on their state Supreme Court.
Right.
But the decision-making function is one I think most people are familiar with, maybe because that's what the media writes about most of the time. They'll say the Supreme Court decided this case or that case, and that's something people follow. We have the final word in every kind of case in the state, and just as a reminder, 95% of civil cases and criminal cases are heard in state courts, not federal courts. So your state Supreme Court is a pretty important institution. But like many other states, the Michigan Constitution also charges the Supreme Court with administrative oversight of all of the courts of the state. And that means the kind of justice, the quality of justice that's delivered throughout the trial courts throughout the state is our responsibility.
And as Chief Justice, are you the main person in charge of overseeing that?
As the Chief Justice, I get no extra pay, but I have a lot of extra administrative duties. Yes, but I have a very talented administrative staff that works for the Supreme Court Administrative Office, and they are working to support those trial courts throughout the state. We have 242 trial courts in Michigan. They hear almost 3 million cases a year. That's an awful lot of people directly affected by this branch of government.
30% of the population of Michigan's, in the court system one way or another in any given year.
And maybe more than that, right? Because each side has, there's usually more than one party in a case.
True.
And lots of your neighbors, probably many of your family members, interact with the court system one way or the other, and not usually because things are going great.
Right.
Usually it's something.
Nobody says, I'm having a wonderful day, I'll go sue someone.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you talk about administrative responsibilities, you can't create new courts, you can't dissolve courts. What kinds of things do you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the administrative team is divided up in ways that I think make sense to support the courts of the state. We have a judicial education team. We have a judicial information services team. They're building all of the tech that our courts use that actually make courts more efficient, more effective. We have a talented trial court services team that are supporting our problem-solving courts and the kinds of programming we now offer in courts throughout the state that's aimed at making communities healthier and safer. We have a budget team. Obviously, we need that team. They're important, especially lately. But we support the work that happens in the trial courts at the individual level with training, support, guidance, and sometimes it takes overarching kind of policy. So policy might be the wrong word. You don't think of judges making policy, but we affect the policies of the courts,
Right.
And so that when I use that word, that's all I mean. I don't mean to.
Speaking of policies of the courts, obviously there's a pandemic going on. Have you been a leader in moving and just talking about whether courts can have sessions by Zoom, et cetera?
Yeah, in fact, Michigan is far and away the national leader in moving our court operations online. We had an advantage in our administrative role. The Supreme Court had purchased Zoom licenses for all of the trial judges in the state long before there was a pandemic, not because we were prescient. We just thought it's a big state. We should start
Right.
figuring out how to do things in a more convenient way to lawyers and litigants. So we had the Zoom licenses, we had the hardware, we had already purchased that a number of years ago. We did not have a lot of judges using them, but they had the ability to use them. So we were able to pretty quickly stand up the kind of support and training and tools they needed to be able to start doing remote hearings. And now all over the state, your judges are doing hearings on the Zoom platform and live streaming them to YouTube. And you can watch them from your smartphone or your laptop, wherever you are. You can see what's happening in your courtrooms.
Do you anticipate having entire trials via Zoom?
So trials is going to be the hardest of all. You should know that very, very few cases are tried, but those that are, it's
less than 10% of the cases, right?
It's less than 5% and significantly less in civil cases and in misdemeanor cases, significantly less. Right. It's a very, very small number, but it's an important feature of our American system, right? It's this place where you as a citizen have a direct check on your government's power, right? You get to say, nope, no way, government. You can't do that. So it's a really important feature of our democracy. But it's going to be the very hardest one to do on the Zoom platform. We have actually run a Zoom trial. It was a fake trial. We had a member of my staff played a criminal defendant. We had a real prosecutor, a real defense lawyer, and a real judge. And we recruited jurors from family members of staff and law students. And we picked a jury and we held the entire trial by Zoom. We did it so that we could put together best practices and, again, training and support for judges and lawyers and litigants who want to use that platform to get their cases tried. Because it's going to take some creativity in the middle of this pandemic to get jury trials off and running. We've had 2 so far in Michigan, one in Traverse City in the high school auditorium, and one in Emmett County. They had one big courtroom, and they had the jurors seated throughout the courtroom instead of in the jury box.
That'd be Petoskey, probably.
It might have been, yeah, yeah.
But does that mean there's a huge backlog because cases have not been able to come to trial since March?
There is definitely a backlog of cases that need to be tried, but the rest of the cases have been able to move at pace on the Zoom platform. Judges are doing all kinds of hearings and hearing arguments on the Zoom platform and moving their dockets throughout the state.
So is it legal? Is it going to be permissible, maybe I should say, for a judge to have a Zoom trial? Could an Oakland Circuit judge have a trial entirely by Zoom?
A judge can have a trial entirely by Zoom as long as the lawyers and the litigants are okay with it. They can't force a criminal defendant to have a trial by Zoom. In fact, they can't do that because the Michigan Supreme Court just held in a unanimous opinion a few weeks ago that I wrote that the Sixth Amendment right to confrontation, you can't guarantee it with video testimony.
So if you want an in-person trial, you can hold out for one.
You might have to wait. So that's going to be a hard call for some lawyers and litigants. Civil trials, on the other hand, which don't have the security concerns and don't have the constitutional protections, those can happen. They can happen lots of places. You can do those safely with a little bit of creativity, which is
We're talking about mainly civil trials involve suing people for money.
That's right. That's exactly that's
and not
that's
being charged with a crime.
That's right. Criminal cases are where people have been accused of a crime and they have a right to a jury to decide their guilt or innocence. And civil cases are disputes between people, usually about money.
Some people think it's sort of bizarre. When there's a vacancy in federal court, the president nominates somebody at any level of federal court, usually with advice from a senator. The Senate confirms them or doesn't, and then they stay there for life. Whereas in Michigan, not only do you have to run for election, people are put on the Supreme Court ballot generally. Almost everybody that's on there currently now was nominated by either the Republican or the Democratic Party, but we don't have partisan justice. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, so this is a topic about which you're going to have me on for about 20 more hours because there's so much to say about it. It's an interesting topic. It's a topic about which there's lots of interesting scholarship. An independent judiciary is a really important feature of our constitutional democracy. And so my biggest complaint about our election system is the role partisanship ends up playing. Even though we appear on the nonpartisan section of the ballot, we're nominated by parties, and the parties therefore have an oversized role in the election process. And I think that undermines the court's, the public confidence that folks have in the court. So, I mean, I can say a whole lot more about that, but I do think that the federal system, where you have lifetime tenure and you are, insulated from you can feel completely confident making unpopular decisions. Judges have to make unpopular decisions. We have to disappoint are friends, or else we're not doing a very good job. Introduce me to a judge who likes every decision she's ever made, and I promise you she's not a very good judge.
In fact, federal judge Avery Cohn, who we both know, said once to me that he was really happy he didn't have to run for election because he had the ability to make decisions that were often unpopular with the public.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not suggesting that you make decisions based on will I get votes for this, or any
no,
justice
yeah,
does.
no, you have to, you really have to be willing to lose friends and lose elections to do the job right. That's exactly the bottom line. People sometimes ask me, how do I know who's the best candidate for judge? And I almost always say, it's the person who has lots of other professional options, the person who does not need the job, right?
Right.
That's the person who's going to be able to do it with independence.
And of course, you had a wonderful job at the University of Michigan beforehand, and
I did, yeah.
and so that's a good point. But when politicians run for office, they can say, I'm for more taxes, I'm for less taxes, I'm for
Yeah.
whatever. But no judicial candidate can say, elect me and I'll repeal Roe versus Wade,
Nope.
or that I will vote a certain way.
No.
So how does somebody campaign
It's a
if you're running for a judicial seat?
It's a terrible campaign pitch, but you're exactly right. In the political branches of government, you get to decide, like, do you like, the current guy's policies? If you don't, you throw him out of office and you get
Right.
you get a new guy with new policies. And that's not the way the judiciary is supposed to work, right? We have to follow the law that's enacted by the political branches of government, and really ultimately by the people through their representatives in those branches, no matter what the answer is. So my campaign pitch is really hard. Like, I'm going to work really hard. I might rule against you. How's that for a campaign pitch? It's
Right.
terrible. It's not like, how do you take that show on the road? What I end up talking about a lot, because I actually believe it matters a lot, is the important work which we started with, that the courts do, the Supreme Court does, supporting the courts of the state. Courtrooms of the state are making really important decisions in people's lives every single day. And we have a choice in those courtrooms about whether we want them to be, more like police stations or emergency rooms. Judges in Michigan are on the front lines of our addiction problem, of poverty, of so many important social issues, and they have a tremendous role to play in supporting their local communities.
Do you think the judicial system, the judges in general, need to do more so that the public understands what they do, and also that they're human beings?
I absolutely feel that way. It's a funny bind, because judges feel like they have to be kind of removed from the public, that to be independent, to
Right.
be. I understand this position very well, but I always argue to my judicial colleagues that the opposite is true. We should be engaged with our communities and talking about the role of a judge, talking about the role of the court, why it's different from the other branches of government. I actually think that would help the public understand our decisions when they might not like them, right?
Exactly.
The more they understand what it is we're supposed to be doing, the more they will be able to understand, okay, well, that's why the court ended up deciding that case that way.
You're not a trial judge. We had this horrific case earlier this week where a federal trial judge, apparently a disgruntled lawyer, came to her house, murdered her son. She wasn't there at the time. Do you have security? Do you worry about that?
Yeah, the federal courts have decent security. That story is absolutely horrible. It just literally makes me sick to my stomach whenever I think about it. Yeah, it was a disgruntled lawyer who had a case in her court, but and the federal court has pretty good security. I have friends who are federal judges, and the federal government makes sure their homes are secure and funds their security, and we do not have that.
Right.
I mean, no, we don't have that in Michigan. I drove here by myself. I left my home this morning by myself. My brother texted me yesterday, I think, reading about that case, and said, "What's your home security system like?"
Right.
I said, don't think I have one. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that on the podcast.
Well, we won't mention your address, but again, you are one of a body. You're handing down decisions.
That's right. Like the U.S. Supreme Court, we make all decisions by committee. We have 7 justices instead of 9, but every single decision we make is by committee.
Before you came to the court 10 or 15 years ago, the Michigan Supreme Court was widely seen as sort of an embarrassment in some ways. The justices didn't get along. This isn't me saying that. Somebody rated us 50 of the 50th courts of the 50 courts. People were normally assumed to be voting their partisan sympathies on cases. That's changed a lot, especially since you became Chief Justice. And you see, for example, you were elected Chief Justice with some Republican support.
Yeah, I mean, again, we are all nonpartisan, but the court right now has 3 justices who were nominated by the Democratic Party, including me, and 4 who were nominated by the Republican Party. And the court selected me to lead it now, and I think that's a nice thing about my colleagues. They wanted to figure out who could do the job right now. My kids had all graduated. I
Right.
had some extra time, so.
So, of course, you weren't there. Is your impression that there's more collegiality?
Yeah, absolutely. The court. I mean, I know all about the way I've heard about the way the court used to be, even from people who served on the court during that time, and it sounds like it was a hard time. I'm really glad that's not the court I serve on. I don't think I would have lasted this long. It's not my personality. I don't think I'd do well in it. But it's been a collegial place since I've been there, and frankly, I credit lots of people for that, and they're not all people nominated by Democrats. I credit my Republican colleagues just as much.
You know, I might mention that while you were nominated by the Democratic Party, you weren't a lot of Democratic bosses, shall we say, first choice. You had to kind of work and get grassroots support to get that nomination. I
Yeah.
know the party chairman at the time did not want you as a nominee.
That was true, but it worked out anyway, right?
Okay, sure. Now, as you mentioned, you have other job options. You probably wouldn't be on unemployment if you didn't do this. Why do you want another 8-year term?
The court is involved in some really important things right now. On the administrative side of the docket, I've been honored the last year and a few months to co-chair with the lieutenant governor, the governor's task force on jail and pretrial incarceration. Our county jails in Michigan have populations have tripled over the last 3 decades, even though crime is at a 50-year low.
Why is that?
Well, we now know, we didn't used to know because it didn't have any statewide data, but with the help of the Pew Charitable Trust and a bipartisan state and county task force, we gathered the data throughout the state. The short answer is poverty. The kinds of things that people are doing, relatively short stays in jail, but stays that are long enough to interfere with your employment, interfere with your taking care of your kids. Jail, even a short stay, is incredibly disruptive. But there are lots of unpaid fines, fees, costs that result in driver's license suspensions. And then the next time you're driving, because you have to get to work, it's Michigan after all, we don't have any other way to get to work, you're now committing a misdemeanor for which you must go to jail. In Wayne County Jail, the highest, the offense for which most people were logged into the jail is driving with a suspended license.
That sounds terribly expensive and inefficient.
Yep, and we could change it pretty easily, and so we're working on it. We have, at the end of the data gathering and hearing from the public and studying best practices around the country, we made 18 consensus recommendations that, if enacted, will make Michigan a national leader in jail and pretrial reform. And the legislature is moving on the first package of those, and I believe we'll be moving on the next package very, very soon. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Cautiously optimistic?
I am cautiously optimistic, yes. Yeah.
You've seen our legal system from a number of vantage points, and obviously you know it's not perfect. That's one of the reasons you started the Michigan Innocence Clinic, after all. What other reforms do you think ought to be undertaken? I know you can't do it all yourself, but what do we need to do?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple others that we're working on. Well, in the civil justice system, people with civil legal needs in Michigan don't have a right to a lawyer if they can't afford one, and 8 out of 10 people who have civil legal problems can't afford lawyers in Michigan. That's a really significant number of people who have to manage the court system on their own.
What's a test to determine whether someone can afford a lawyer or not?
That's just by the federal indigency standards, so by the standards the federal government uses. But it turns out that most middle-income people can't afford lawyers either. So a lot of people navigate courts with, family disputes, eviction matters. These are important issues, right? That they have to navigate on their own. And the courts, frankly, are not set up for people without legal training to do well navigating them on their own. So we have this Justice for All task force, which has an ambitious goal of 100% access within 3 years. Not by a lawyer for every single one of those people, but there are lots of other ways we can make sure that people who need to navigate courts can get the information they need to make sure that they can have their voices heard and their disputes resolved in a way that gives them confidence in the work the court's doing. And that to me is one of the biggest projects we are tackling right now.
If somebody's listening to this or watching us What's a good place to start? Because I think for so many people, the courts are these great forbidding marble pillars buildings, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. So you mean if somebody has a legal problem and they need to figure something out?
Oh yeah, if they say where is there a website? Is there
Yeah.
someplace you'd send them?
So the Michigan Supreme Court website is pretty good. I will tell you, our platform is not the best, but we have a lot of excellent information on our website, and it links you to just about everything I've been talking about. The Jail Task Force
Right.
report is on there. You can go on there and find the virtual courtroom directory where you can click on any county, see which judges are live streaming to YouTube, click on the link, and watch judges from your smartphone.
And what's the address?
That's a great question. But if you Google Michigan Supreme Court, it'll come up.
That's a great idea. That's
It's in my saved tabs, so I don't. Yeah, I should know that.
that-
I would say if you have a legal problem, though, that you're looking, and this is also linked on the Michigan Supreme Court website, MichiganLegalHelp.org is a fantastic self-help legal resource. It's the best one in the country, and helping thousands of people every day. And it has tremendously user-friendly toolkits for if you have a legal problem that you need some help figuring out.
You know, federal judges can serve for life, and it strikes me as being very ironic in that, I mean, Joe Biden is a lawyer, the Democratic apparent nominee. He may well be elected president. He would be ineligible to run for the Michigan Supreme Court because he's over 70. Does it make any sense in the modern era to say, as we do, that no one can run for a state judgeship after they turn 70?
I mean, the answer is there are obviously people who are. You think of some of the judges in the Eastern District of Michigan who are far over 70. Avram Cohn is 95, and he's brilliant, right? I mean,
Right.
and who wants to lose his service? So I personally think there are tons of qualified people over the age of 70. I also happen to think that turnover is good for every organization, and there might be a better way to achieve
Sure.
that. You've probably read about people who propose 18-year terms for Supreme Court justices, and that's it. You know, you're in, and 18 years later, you're
Federal
out.
Supreme Court justice?
Yeah, the
Right.
U.S. Supreme Court. There are
Right.
a number of academics who
Right.
propose an 18-year staggered term, so each president gets 2 appointments, I think, and
Something like that.
yeah, something like that. And I could imagine that kind of system working well in the state court as well. I think that there's something to be said for new people showing up at a conference table and bringing a new perspective and
So
challenging you
maybe
to think
term
differently.
limits rather than an age limit.
Maybe term limits rather than age limits. Yeah.
What else should people know about the courts or about you? What would you like people to
Oh,
know?
I don't know about me, but I think they should know that the courts are right now doing more than ever before to solve problems. We have problem-solving courts in every part of the state, and these are courts where instead of cycling people charged with crimes through jails, which is an easy thing to do and doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't take a lot of staff time,
Right.
we're instead treating the underlying conditions that landed them in court. So we have mental health treatment courts, we have drug treatment courts, we have veterans treatment courts, we have sobriety courts, where we're seeing incredible success rates. They're time consuming, they're expensive because they take a lot of staff time. People report for many months, sometimes a couple years, to make sure that their progress is sustained before they graduate. They have formal graduations from these programs, and they're really saving lives and strengthening communities. Courts really can be a place to solve problems, not just dole out consequences. And I want folks to know that the courts belong to the public. They owe the public a duty to be a force for good, and we're trying to do that.
And you like to spend some more time making that even more the case.
I think so. Yeah, that's my idea. I want to do even more of that throughout the state.
By the way, I should mention that you don't run, although you run for re-election, you don't run against, it's not like Smith running against Jones, correct? You've got a pool of people on the ballot.
That's
and
right.
The top two vote getters, no matter what their party is, or if they're an independent, will get chosen by the voters on November 3rd.
That's exactly right. And it's the nonpartisan section of the ballot, so you might not even know what their party is. So you'll pick 2 names out of at least 7 that I know
Right.
of, and the top 2 vote getters will win.
And of course, it does designate if you are an incumbent, it says that you're a justice.
Yeah, I'm going to have that big advantage. That's a big advantage.
Well, good luck to you, Chief Justice McCormack. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think our justice system is fascinating. I hope you've inspired some of our viewers to want to learn more about it. Maybe a few of them to go to law school. I want to thank everyone for listening and watching today. I'd also like to thank those who've contributed to help keep these podcasts going. If you'd like to help too, I'd be thrilled if you could send a contribution to me via PayPal on my blog, lessenberryinc.com, or message me on Facebook for more details. And again, please check out my blog. Click the button to subscribe. The price is right. It's absolutely free. Listen to more episodes, tell your friends, and feel free to send me a message. This is Jack Lessenberry with the Politics and Prejudices podcast. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks again to Chief Justice Bridget McCormack.
Thank you.
Great. If you look at the ways in which we pick state and federal judges, you're bound to conclude that at least one of the two methods makes no sense. In the federal system, justices are nominated by the President of the United States, confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and then they stay there as long as they want to be, essentially for life, as long as they exhibit good behavior, whatever that means. Oh, they can be impeached and removed by the Congress, but only 8 have been in our entire history. Many federal judges stay on the bench into their 90s, and we have had several of them who are over 100. State Supreme Court justices, on the other hand, have to run for election and re-election every 8 years and can't run after they turn 70 years of age. That means, although Joe Biden may well be elected President of the United States this year, he'd be ineligible to run for the Michigan Supreme Court because he's too old. On top of that, there's something else about the way Michigan picks high court justices that seems bizarre. They almost always get elected only after having been nominated by one of the two major political parties, Republican or Democrat. Does that mean that justice should be partisan? Of course not. And judicial candidates can't answer questions as to how they'd rule on a particular issue. But in practice, everyone knows that the Republican Party would never nominate a candidate who is pro-choice, just as Democrats would almost certainly never nominate one who is anti-abortion. There's a reasonable argument that voters should have the right to select those who sit in judgment of them and the laws their legislatures make. That might make sense if we had a fully informed electorate. But too few busy voters know much about judicial candidates. For years, it was a given that if you wanted to get someone elected as a judge in the state, having the last name Kelly or O'Brien helped a lot. There's also a reason to worry lest voters retaliate against a judge who made a judicially sound but unpopular ruling. There's also the fact that most Michigan Supreme Court justices in recent years have first been appointed to fill vacancies. When they run for re-election, they're listed on the ballot as a justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, meaning their opponent is that brand X commercials always tell us not to buy. What I'd like to see is a system where some reputable group, like the Michigan Bar Association, picks a pool of 6 of the best qualified candidates from which the governor could choose anytime there's a vacancy. We might also use the system to select candidates for nonpartisan judicial races. But without a constitutional amendment, that would require politicians to voluntarily give up some power. Don't hold your breath for that. This is Jack Lessenberry. Thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you again soon.